Hello and welcome to another edition of ForestFanTV as we react to an eventful couple of days down at the City Ground. Stuart Pearce lost his job as manager on Sunday. He was replaced by Dougie Freedman, and then a day later we found out that Paul Faulkner, the chief executive, has been put on gardening leave. He's claiming that his position at the club was untenable. I've got Rish with me from 1865. There's plenty for us to discuss here, Rish. Starting with Sunday night and the dismissal of Stuart Pearce, what's your take on it and what's your opinion on that decision?
Well, firstly, I said at the time that I was devastated. Devastated on an emotional level because Stuart, it's not worked out for him, but also devastated because it's yet another, cycle of boom and bust, I suppose, in terms of... I said last time I spoke to you that the definition of insanity is doing exactly the same things over and over again and expecting different results. And you know what? It's happened again, hasn't it?
We were talking, weren't we, a few weeks ago about the importance of stability and the hope that somebody would be given a couple of years in the job to settle the club down and to rebuild it off the pitch and obviously do well on it. But in the end, it's probably the results which have cost Pearce that run of 3 wins from 21 games, and sometimes it gets to a point where the results have the final say.
Yeah, football's a results game, okay? No one's going to deny that. No one's going to deny the results weren't good enough. There's a lot of venting and hyperbole on social media. People say, it's the worst Forest team I've ever seen. It's like, well, in that case, you're probably about 12 years old, because about 12 years ago, I watched a worse Forest team. Less than 12 years ago, I watched a worse Forest team. I'm thinking about you, David Platt, Joe Kinnear, Gary Megson. So let's not get overly excited about how bad the performances are. Actually, you know what? No one would be complaining about the performance if Britta Sombolonga's header on Saturday had gone in rather than hitting the bar, and if Stephen McLaughlin hadn't made a mistake. And, I'm not attaching any blame to him. Players make mistakes. He had a pretty decent match, and he made a mistake. It cost us. Why did it cost us? Because we hadn't scored first.
No sooner had Stuart Pearce been dismissed as manager, Dougie Freedman, another former Forest player, he was brought in as his successor. I'll be honest, when I first heard the news about Freedman, I was a little bit underwhelmed, but I think that was just partly because I was still taking in the news that Pearce had gone and still sort of getting over that. But a couple of days on now since Freeman's been appointed, what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that it's very suspicious, the fact that less than an hour after the news broke that Stuart had been sacked, all of a sudden Dougie was in post. It's a bit like, if your other half sends you a text to say that she's leaving you, and then when you're in the car, and then when you get home you find her in bed with another man who's smoking your cigars and drinking your port. So I really felt that there was something not quite right there. But in terms of the actual appointment, putting the emotion aside, looking at logic, I can see why they've gone for this appointment. Dougie did a reasonable job at Palace. He gained a reputation for working with the younger players, and rightly so, and Wilfred Zaha is the most high-profile example of that. He steadied the ship at Bolton, and then he was the victim of an austerity regime. So actually, if you look at that, he's ticking quite a lot of boxes for what Forest need to do at the moment. Yeah,
when you look at the job he did at Crystal Palace to take them from relegation candidates to a playoff place, that's where they were when he left them. They had a few good results as well in the Cups. That they beat Manchester United. I think that was in the League Cup they won at Old Trafford. He's shown quite a bit of promise already, and he's only 40 years old. That's one thing he's got on his side. There's time for him to grow in the role and potentially go on to be a very good manager.
Yeah, and so he won't even be 41 by the time he's looking for his next job.
So we look at now the chief executive, or the lack of chief executive at Forest now. That's Paul Faulkner. He left on Monday morning. He resigned from his post. Still no official word from the club. All we hear is that he's been put on gardening leave. But he's apparently unhappy with his role at the City Ground. He felt that he was being undermined by some of Fawaz's friends who apparently still have influence with him. He was trying to do good things for the club in terms of restructuring behind the scenes, trying to put Forest back in line with financial fair play regulations. And that was partly one of the reasons why we needed a chief executive. But now he's gone. Who's running the club and what's going on with the administration?
It begs the question who was running the club even when Faulkner was in post, because he talked a good game. He said the right things in terms of dealing with late payments to contractors and suppliers, and so on. The question being, though, is that if you are saying the right things but you're not being equipped to actually do them, then what's the point in staying in your job? And I would imagine that that's why he's gone. But of course, the trouble is, this is only ever going to be he said, she said. Let's just look at a bit of the track record over the last few years at Forest since Fawaz came in, okay? Frank Clark offered an ambassadorial role in lieu of being chairman. Then when he and several other members of the club hierarchy were dismissed, not a word about it. Do you remember Cousin Omar, Stephen?
Yes.
Cousin Omar, who was installed as chairman and has actually been airbrushed from the list of chairmen in the City Ground main entrance. Okay, so I hesitate to use the word Stalinist because this is football after all, okay? But there's something not quite right in the way that the contributions of people sometimes doesn't seem to count for much.
It is a concern when you also hear from Faulkner's side of it. Again, this is hearsay in the newspapers. But apparently he wasn't even consulted over the appointment of Dougie Freedman, which, as a chief executive, that's one of your key decisions to make.
Well, the chairman is the guy who owns the club, who says, I want this, I want that, and the chief executive is the person who's got the responsibility for the day-to-day running. Is there a more key decision in a football club when it comes to the day-to-day running of the club as a successful entity than who is the manager? No, I don't think there is.
What concerns me most is that it seems as if Fawaz isn't learning from the mistakes he's made in the past. It took him the best part of 2 years to appoint a chief executive, and then when he finally brought one in, he's only been here for 4 or 5 months. You would think now Fawaz has had enough time, as I say, to learn from those mistakes and begin to run the club properly.
You'd hope so. I mean, there's possibly bigger issues at play. Is Fawaz concerned with just being popular? You know, there's suggestions, there's no evidence, but there's suggestions that the views of 800 or so people on Twitter, you know, a very sharp and very vocal minority of people who get out there on social media and get in touch with him that way, that influences things. Look at the appointment of Billy Davies, for example, okay? Look at the dismissal of Stuart Pearce, for example. So does he just want to be popular, make the right decision by the fans? If so, you can understand that, but that's where you need to have other people to have checks and balances, you know. And at the moment, you can't help but feel, and let's just reference Sean O'Driscoll, okay? The dismissal of Sean O'Driscoll, you can't just help but feel it's a rich man's plaything.
You look at John McGovern coming in as the ambassador a couple of months ago. I can see why that might be an appointment to keep the fans sweet, to get a European Cup winning legend into the club. And also offering Stuart Pearce an alternative role at the City Ground. Rumour is he was offered the director of football role, but if you were Stuart Pearce, would you really want to take that, knowing that somebody else has just gone into your manager's job?
I suppose it's the getting home to your wife being in bed with another man thing, isn't it? What I would say is, and I argued this on Twitter, on the 1865 Twitter feed, that you don't necessarily have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. If you look at something that preceded Fawaz's reign, and maybe he just doesn't have maybe it wasn't on his radar, maybe he doesn't have the emotional intelligence to work it out, but Steve Cottrell, the football was not great, the club was struggling, brought in Sean O'Driscoll, the football got better, the results got better, the mood around the club got better. Sean O'Driscoll as a manager, he didn't turn many people on in terms of his public persona, but there's a feeling that by having a footballing thinker in place, that it was going to get us in the right direction, okay? That potentially would have been the answer for Stuart. Keep Stuart as the manager, but get another coach in, a tactician, because that's the main area where we were lacking, certainly in those last few games, and arguably even in the winning run, whereby it was kind of gung-ho, let's go for it. Tactically, you know, there were moments where things didn't work. I should point out that tactically there were moments when it did work. So against Derby, for instance, the substitutions worked, playing Osborne on the left worked, okay? But then you looked at the Millwall match and you just realised he'd got it wrong from point A and didn't have the nous to make the necessary changes to improve things. And in fact, his substitutions actually made Forest perform worse on that occasion. So get a tactician in. You know, I'm not saying these precise people, but of the likes of Paul Hart or Sean O'Driscoll, someone who actually understands the way football works, understands the thinking behind, how to implement a philosophy, to get them training right, to get them understanding their roles a bit better. And that would have been the ideal thing, because Stuart was, by all accounts, doing a great job in all other senses.
Yeah, off the pitch, as you allude to there, he was building links again with the academy and looking to repair the club after the damage that was caused by the Billy Davies regime. So it's a shame to see all that torn up again, and potentially we're going for a short-term appointment with Dougie Freedman. I hope that Freedman can continue the work that Pearce has done. All the academy staff are still there, so those links will hopefully remain. And Freedman himself at Crystal Palace, he brought through players like Wilfred Zaha, gave them a chance in the first team, so he's got some pedigree when it comes to bringing youngsters through. But going back to Fawaz, you mentioned there the club is probably, like his train set, he'll play with it and he'll do what he wants with it. Is he part of the problem, though, at Forest? Thinking about the last 2 or 3 years, all of the turmoil that we've had, all of the changes we've had, the one constant at the club has been Fawaz.
Yeah. I say, the fact that Cousin Omar was airbrushed out, Frank Clark was airbrushed out, Faulkner's leaving has not even been mentioned on the club website, okay? And then, so all the negatives, you don't get any of those. Positives get reported, okay? Just look at that, the embarrassment of the Billy Davies, Fawaz, Natalie Jackson loving. I mean, that was... And the danger is, there's a marvellous article on In the Top One today, which you may or may not have seen by now, Stephen. It's only published a little while ago.
Yeah, I do recommend, if you get a chance, go and have a look at that. It's a really interesting piece.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And this is something that my brother, as the other contributor to 1865, has also said, is that football isn't just about results. Yes, results are important in terms of maintaining your status amongst other clubs, but also football is about community, it's about belonging, and unfortunately that sense of community, I don't know, you just look, and I know this is more polarised because of social media and so on, but there is a sense of division, there's infighting amongst fans, there's people who have blind loyalty. Football is a tribal game, but it's supposed to be one tribe, let's say Nottingham Forest, against another, let's say Derby County. At the moment we've got several factions of Forest fans as well. Maybe that's just natural, maybe that's a coincidence because of the modern nature of communication. But, coming back to your original point, is Fawaz a constant? Well, of course he is. Of course he is. Now, things weren't going well under Nigel Doughty, but he had the idea of having a strategy in place. And he changed that strategy several times over 10 years. But Fawaz doesn't seem to understand strategy. And at this point, it might be worth remembering where he's come from, okay? He runs a company in Kuwait. He is a man of vast wealth, okay? How did he get that wealth? From the family business. Did he accumulate that wealth himself? Apparently not. It was his dad's business. Does the guy actually know how to run a business? Does he have that sense of strategy? I don't know the answers, but I'm asking the questions.
Yeah, well, in that case, if he doesn't, you think it would be common sense to bring footballing people in, people who know how to run a football club, and let them get on with it. Judging by the reports this week, and the fallout with Faulkner, he's brought a football person into the club, but he's not let him do his job. So you just don't know what you're going to get from Fawaz. Mm-hmm. But what I do find is that there's a certain section of Forest support who will not have a bad word said against him because of all the money he's put into the club. Mm-hmm. And don't get me wrong, it's great that somebody wants to invest in Forest, and he took over at a very difficult time, and we can't forget that. But surely, just because he's put millions of pounds into the club doesn't mean he should be completely immune from criticism.
Well, I don't know. There's the legal point of view, which is legally it's his club, and therefore he can do what he wants. But then football, well, I mean, anyone who's seen our Twitter feed, and I'm sure you saw this, Stephen, I retweeted something which was, and I'll edit it for the sake of it being a family show, but basically said, football is rubbish. Okay, it's full of too much money, it's got no soul, it's lost its heart, and football is rubbish, and I've had enough of it. Okay, and that's the thing, football is a beautiful game. That's why I go out and I have a kickabout every week with, 9 other people, and it's loads of fun, and I wouldn't swap that for the world. Watching a football team playing in the way that we've seen Forest play occasionally, glimpses of it throughout our lifetimes, is an absolute joy. Is there anything better? Watching Germany beat Brazil 7-1, watching history there, watching how a Germany team just tore apart, the apparent masters of football, was something to behold. As a business, horrible. Absolutely horrible. Would want nothing to do with it. And remember, I think it's about sort of 15 years ago, Noel Gallagher said, they asked him, would you invest in Man City? He goes, no, why would I want anything to do with that? I enjoy being a fan too much.
It seems as if the fans just feel even more detached from the players on the pitch and now the clubs themselves, and that's what the piece on In the Top One was relating to. He feels like Forest's history of being a community club, a family club, is being ruined by Fawaz and his reckless firing of managers and this need to go and chase the big pot of money that is the Premier League. But it also is equally frustrating because you look at Forest as a club and how we're set up, you think, we can almost do whatever we want with this club. We can build it up to be, a great club that brings through youngsters, plays football the right way. We can almost start with a clean slate and have a real structure running throughout the club, like Southampton have done, like Swansea have done in recent years.
And like Derby are doing.
Yeah, Derby as well are in the middle of that, and that should be the biggest wake-up call to us and to Fawaz to think, well, if they can do it that way, we should be doing it that way too.
Yep.
But if he's got footballing people around him, he's got John McGovern there, he's had Paul Faulkner, if he's not going to listen to them, then for me, the future is worrying in that sense.
Well, we'll never know what goes on behind the scenes. We'll only know what they tell us, okay? It's interesting, though, if Gary Megson ever writes an autobiography, there's no love lost between the Forest fans and Gary Megson, and I'm no fan of his, but I'd love to see some of the things he'd have to say about his time in charge of Forest. The player mutiny. Alan Rodgers was doing loads of tweets last night about how he was willfully disobeying Megson and basically got fined 2 weeks' wages every 2 weeks. Is that what you want at a club? Do you want that sense of kind of disconnection between the players, the club, the fans, the management, the chair? No, of course you don't. A club that works well together. And you look at Swansea as being a great example of that. You look at Derby as being a great example of that. Middlesbrough, Steve Gibson, he's not always had success, but he's tried to go for continuity in terms of the behind-the-scenes stuff and appoint managers who fit in with that philosophy. That's the same as Swansea have done. Swansea have had a few managers. The one who upset the apple cart was Michael Laudrup, and he had a good first season, but then it became clear he wanted to try and do things his own way. That didn't fit in with the club philosophy, so he went. What's wrong with that? And the thing is, you can aim for the big time, and you can throw money at it, and you can get promotion, and then you can crash and burn. I personally, and I know this is something that a lot of people won't agree with, I personally would rather watch Forest competing every week in the Championship than watch Forest get tanked every week in the Premier League. Because then you feel like part of something.
And maybe the Premier League isn't all it's cracked up to be. Personally, I quite enjoy being in the Championship. The competitive nature, you don't know what's going to happen from 1 week to the next. And there are some big clubs down here, and it makes for interesting games, interesting seasons. Yeah. So, as much as I would like Forest to be in the Premier League, I think we all would. We all want the club to be as successful as it can be. But there's a right way of doing it, and hopefully, Fawaz and people at the club will learn from the mistakes of the past. Just to sum up, Rish, your final thoughts on the past 48 hours at Forest and perhaps where we go in the future.
I don't want to sound overly emotional. I mean, the thing is that I remember when I was about 6 years old asking my dad, which football team do you support? Bearing in mind, my dad did not grow up in Nottingham, and he said that he supported Forest since before he moved to Nottingham. And I said, well, why do you support Nottingham Forest? He goes, Brian Clough. And it's because that sense that there was someone there who we could all get behind, who, even though he was occasionally a bad boy and, didn't always do things the right way, he always did it for the right reasons. And I was just joking with one of my friends, is that I kind of cursed the day that happened, because when you're brought up with that kind of sense of what football is, then it's difficult to see the club as they are now. And I say, it might be very different if you are a teenager today when all you've seen is Forest, since they fell out of the Premier League. So it's been horrible, and it's made up my mind of something that I kind of thought about when Sean O'Driscoll was sacked, which is, unfortunately, I don't want to put any more money into the club, and I won't be renewing my season ticket anymore. I don't know what the right way is to run a football club, but the way it's happening now is definitely the wrong way.
And I don't think you'll be the only one who decides not to put any more money into the club, renewing season tickets and so on. We want to hear your thoughts on everything that's gone off this week. So get in touch on Twitter at ForestFanTV. Visit the website as well, that is www.forestfantv.com. And as ever, leave your comments in the section below. Until next time, from Rish and from me, goodbye.